At 04:17 local time, Iranian naval units executed an operation that would send shockwaves through every major economy on the planet. In less than 1 hour, they transformed the world's most critical oil choke point into an impassable minefield. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 21 million barrels of oil pass every single day, was sealed. Not with warships, not with a conventional blockade. With something far more effective and infinitely harder to counter. The operation began in darkness. 12 small vessels, indistinguishable from the hundreds of fishing boats that operate in these waters daily, departed from 3 separate Iranian ports along the coast. No military insignia, no radar signatures large enough to draw attention, just small, fast-moving craft loaded with cargo that wouldn't appear unusual on any standard maritime scan. U.S. Navy destroyers were positioned in the region. The USS Nitze was stationed 40 kilometers to the east, outside the strait itself. The USS Laboon was farther south, near the Gulf of Oman. Both ships had their Aegis radar systems active, tracking contacts across hundreds of square kilometers. But these small boats blended into the background noise. Fishermen, civilian traffic, nothing that warranted a response. What those radar operators didn't know was that each vessel carried between 18 and 24 naval mines. Not old contact mines from World War II. These were modern influence mines, designed to sit on the seabed between 50 and 80 meters below the surface, armed with pressure sensors, magnetic detectors, and acoustic triggers. Based on Soviet-era designs but upgraded with contemporary electronics, these weapons could distinguish between a large commercial tanker and a smaller patrol boat, and they were nearly impossible to detect once deployed. The Iranian crews worked fast. Each boat followed a precise GPS route, dropping mines at predetermined coordinates calculated months in advance. The devices were released overboard one by one, sinking silently to the ocean floor. No explosions, no signals, just steady, methodical deployment across the narrowest section of the strait where shipping lanes converge into a corridor barely 33 kilometers wide. 58 minutes after the first mine touched the seabed, the operation was complete. Over 200 mines now sat in a distributed pattern across the main transit route. The Iranian boats dispersed, engines running quiet, blending back into maritime traffic as if nothing had happened. By the time the sun rose 2 hours later, they were back in port. The Strait of Hormuz looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. The first indication came from a Maersk tanker scheduled to transit the strait at 06:30. The captain received an urgent message from Iranian maritime authorities, broadcast on open channels and repeated in English, Arabic, and Farsi. The waterway was closed. All commercial traffic was advised to hold position or divert. No explanation, no timeline for reopening, just a flat, unambiguous instruction: do not enter. Within minutes, the message reached shipping companies, port authorities, and energy ministries worldwide. At 07:12, Brent crude oil futures spiked 11% in early trading. By 09, the increase had reached 18%. Panic spread through commodity markets. Refineries in Japan, South Korea, and India went into emergency protocol. Strategic reserves were assessed. Alternative supply routes were calculated. But the numbers were clear. There was no replacement for 21 million barrels per day. In Washington, the Pentagon convened an emergency meeting. Satellite imagery confirmed Iranian broadcasts, small vessel traffic in the early morning hours, routes consistent with a mining operation, no visual confirmation of the mines themselves, which was expected. These weapons were designed to be invisible until activated. The immediate question was, how fast can we clear it? The answer was not encouraging. The U.S. Navy maintains mine countermeasure groups specifically for this scenario. Avenger-class ships equipped with sonar, remotely operated vehicles, and specialized crews trained to locate and neutralize underwater mines. But these vessels were not in the region. The nearest MCM group was stationed near Bahrain, over 600 kilometers away. Getting them to the Strait of Hormuz would take 18 hours. Even after arrival, the real work would begin. Modern influence mines don't float. They don't emit signals. They sit dormant on the ocean floor, waiting. The only way to locate them is to conduct a slow, methodical sonar sweep of the entire seabed, using towed arrays and underwater drones. Each square kilometer takes approximately 4 to 6 hours to scan thoroughly. The mine section covered an estimated 80 square kilometers. The math was brutal. Even with multiple ships working in parallel, clearing the entire field would take between 10 and 14 days. And that assumed no interference, perfect weather, and no additional mines being laid during clearance. But this was not a static problem. Iran had demonstrated it could seed the strait in under an hour. If they chose to add more mines each night, the U.S. would be playing an unwinnable game, clearing during the day, New deployments at night, an endless cycle that would keep the waterway closed indefinitely. At the White House, senior advisors presented three options. Option 1. Launch immediate airstrikes on Iranian naval facilities to prevent further mining operations. Aggressive, but it carried significant risk. Striking Iranian territory would almost certainly trigger a broader conflict, including potential attacks on U.S. bases, allied nations, and energy infrastructure of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Option 2. Negotiate. Open diplomatic channels and attempt to reach an agreement allowing Iran to remove the mines in exchange for concessions. But this would signal weakness, and there was no guarantee Iran would comply. It would set a precedent that closing the Strait of Hormuz was a viable bargaining chip. Option 3. Force the issue. Send warships through the minefield, accepting losses, and establish a military corridor for commercial traffic. But no one was prepared to order sailors into a known minefield. The loss of even a single destroyer would be politically devastating, and if a mine struck a fully loaded oil tanker, the environmental fallout would dwarf the current crisis. While Washington debated, the global economy began to fracture. Crude oil storage tanks in Europe and Asia held an average of 11 days' supply at current consumption rates. That buffer was designed for short-term disruptions, not extended closures. If the strait remained sealed for 2 weeks, rationing would begin. If it lasted a month, multiple economies would face energy shortages severe enough to trigger recessions. Airlines started canceling long-haul routes to conserve fuel. Trucking companies in South Korea requested government subsidies. Manufacturing plants in Japan began reducing shifts. The ripple effects were immediate and compounding. At 14 o'clock on the second day, the first U.S. mine countermeasure ships arrived. Sonar arrays were deployed. Underwater drones were launched. The process of scanning the seabed began. Within 3 hours, the first mine was located. It sat 62 meters below the surface, exactly where the Iranians said it would be. The device was photographed, logged, and marked with a floating buoy for later disposal. By the end of day 2, 19 mines had been found. The clearance teams worked in rotating shifts, scanning, identifying, and marking. But progress was slow. At this rate, the operation would take 12 days, and every night, U.S. patrol aircraft circled overhead, watching for Iranian boats attempting to lay additional mines. On day 3, economic pressure intensified. Oil prices had stabilized at 22% above pre-closure levels, but only because strategic reserves were being released. The International Energy Agency coordinated the largest emergency drawdown in history, releasing 60 million barrels from member nations' stockpiles. It was a stopgap measure, buying time, but not solving the underlying problem. Behind closed doors, European leaders began reaching out to Tehran through unofficial channels. The message was clear: name your terms. But Iran's response was deliberately vague. They expressed willingness to discuss the matter, but only after certain unspecified conditions were met. The ambiguity was intentional. Every day the strait remained closed, Iran's leverage increased. The mine-clearing operation continued. By day 3, 47 mines had been located and marked. Disposal teams were now working alongside search crews, using remotely operated vehicles to attach small explosive charges to each mine. The charges would be detonated in controlled sequences, destroying the mines without triggering a chain reaction. The U.S. Navy calculated that at the current pace, the strait could be declared safe for limited commercial traffic by day 11. Full clearance would take 14 days. But that assumed no complications, no equipment failures, and no new mines. On the morning of day 4, Iranian state media released a statement. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz was a defensive measure in response to aggressive U.S. military posturing. The mines would be removed once a mutual de-escalation agreement was reached. The wording was carefully constructed to place responsibility on Washington while giving Tehran room to negotiate from strength. By day 5, the clearance operation had located 94 mines. Progress was accelerating as crews became more efficient, but new concerns emerged. Weather forecasts showed a storm system moving into the region within 72 hours. High winds and rough seas would halt all underwater operations for at least 48 hours. The timeline was slipping again, and then, on the night of day 5, something changed. U.S. surveillance aircraft detected small boat activity along the Iranian coast. 12 vessels, matching the profile of the original mining operation, were preparing to depart. The alarm went up immediately. If Iran was about to lay another wave of mines, the entire clearance effort would be reset to zero. Fighter aircraft were scrambled. Destroyers moved closer to the strait. Rules of engagement were updated. Any Iranian vessel approaching the minefield with suspicious cargo could be intercepted and boarded. The Iranian boats departed at 02:30. They followed a similar route to the original operation, moving slowly through the darkness. U.S. aircraft tracked them with infrared sensors. Warships positioned themselves to intercept. The tension was extreme, but as the boats neared the edge of the minefield, they stopped. They held position for 20 minutes, engines idling, and then turned back toward the coast. No mines were deployed, no confrontation occurred. It appeared to be a probe, a test of U.S. response times and resolve. Whatever the intent, the message was clear. Iran could reseed the minefield whenever they chose. The U.S. could clear mines during the day, but Iran controlled the night. And as long as that dynamic held, the Strait of Hormuz would remain closed. The global economy would remain in crisis, and Washington would remain in search of an exit strategy that didn't exist. 58 minutes to close the world's most critical energy choke point, 5 days and counting to reopen it, and every night the cycle threatened to reset.